and let us all do we can to build a better future.
So Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders. Let's talk about Bernie Sanders here for a second and his overall legacy. Like all of us, Hard Lens Media was, inspired by the actions of Bernie Sanders in 2016. I think looking back at it now, there probably would have been a lot of more changes if we kind of knew what kind of spineless, nutless wonder he would be. Perhaps the show would be different. Who knows? Who knows? Perhaps all of us would view politics far differently now if we knew what kind of lackluster, mediocre person he would be. So before I spell out the bad, let's bring up something interesting that did happen. Now, he's not going to be going full-on ceasefire, but Sanders votes no on giving aid to Israel as this inhumane war that's happening in Gaza. So Senator Bernie Sanders was a lone member of the Senate Democratic Caucus to oppose advancing $110.5 billion supplemental foreign aid measure on Wednesday, expressing opposition to the bill's unconditional military assistance for the Israeli government. Sanders went on to state, I voted no on the foreign aid supplement bill today for one reason, Sanders said in a statement. I do not believe that we should give the right-wing extremist Netanyahu government an additional $10 billion with no strings attached to continue their inhumane war against the Palestinian people. Bernie, I wish you were more vocal about this sometime in October, dare I say it, maybe November, maybe even early December, but okay, better late than never, but it's still not calling for a ceasefire. I know Warren and any other Democratic politician are not going to bring that up. Hell, Fetterman is, well, I got to be careful with YouTube guidelines, but even good old Senator John Fetterman, remember that guy who was supposed to be the next Bernie Sanders? That jagoff? Yeah, even he decided to retweet about assault jokes while this conflict's going on. Democrats, I feel shame that I once used to take you seriously. Going on, he says, Israel has the absolute right to defend itself against Hamas terrorists who attacked them on October 7th. Hey, Bernie, Jimmy Dore and a few other channels have also shined a light on the fact that, a lot of that security footage from October 7th has disappeared. Plus, the New York Times did a very interesting article about, how the intel agencies were kind of given a heads up a year ago that something crazy like that would have taken place. And they did nothing. They do not have the legal or moral right to kill thousands of innocent Palestinian men, women, and children. Well, they are. The death toll is rising up past 17,000 to 20,000. And the refugees have nowhere to go. And we've seen the imagery, too. We've seen the imagery of people being displaced. We've seen the imagery of families being torn apart. Bernie, I kind of want to bring this up to you. I know this has been shared out by Hotspot, but let's talk about this aid.
I'm here in Al Arish, Egypt. I just flew in on a C-17 with 36,000 pounds of urgently needed medical supplies, food, and blankets. Al Arish has become a humanitarian hub where the international community sends food, medicine, and other vitally needed commodities that then get loaded onto trucks, get inspected, and then make their way into Gaza. Unfortunately, only a third of the UN appeal to provide these urgently needed provisions has been filled. Today, I announced an additional $21 million on top of the $100 million that President Biden already committed.
But is the aid going anywhere? And the answer is no, it is not. The people are stuck. Refugees are being told to flee, but they have nowhere to go. As the bombings and the shelling continues, as the military advancement of the Israeli Defense Forces keep pushing forward into Gaza, people have nowhere to go. And we've seen the shocking imagery of men being rounded up, stripped of all their clothing, families being torn apart. There's nowhere to go. It must be an absolute nightmare. What have we laid for the future? What kind of seeds have we planted? Politicians in Washington, D.C., you could have avoided this. You could have done the right thing. But, oh, wait, we have money in politics. And, of course, we have lobby groups that want to continue on with war profiteering. Madness.
But all of us need to do more. While trucks are flowing into Gaza, Not nearly enough food, medicine, and fuel is reaching civilians in need. We have to streamline the process so that those trucks can flow more quickly, and all countries need to step up to do more.
Yeah, well, here, listen to what John Kirby has to say
about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Name me one more nation, any other nation, that's doing as much as the United States to alleviate the pain and suffering of the people of Gaza. You can't. You just can't. The United States, through President Biden, is leading the effort to get trucks, food, water, medicine, and fuel into the people of Gaza. Wait. Name another nation that's doing as more than the United States to get hostages out or to get people, foreign nationals, out of Gaza. You can't do it. And name another nation that is doing more to urge our Israeli counterparts, to be as cautious and deliberate as they can be in the process.
Now, returning back to the article, because I'm tired of hearing that guy lie. The aid package, which also includes billions in military assistance for Ukraine, failed to clear the procedural hurdle Wednesday, with every Republican voting no over the absence of immigration policy changes that progressives have condemned as draconian. Senate Majority Leader Chucky Boy Schumer flipped his initial yes vote to a no in a maneuver that will allow him to bring the bill forward again at a later date. Bernie Sanders, who has faced progressive criticism and outrage for rejecting calls for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, said in a Senate floor speech on Monday that Israel must dramatically change its approach to minimize civilian harm and lay out a wider political process that can secure lasting peace. Well, let's pull up this video here from Case Study QB Bernie. Shout out again to Case Study QB, who's wrongly being censored.
As fighting rages on in the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis. Today, the Gaza Health Ministry says the death toll in the region has surpassed 17,000, while the UN is warning that civilians trying to flee the fighting have nowhere safe to go. Meanwhile, Israeli forces are now blowing up the entrances to Hamas tunnels, while also reportedly considering flooding them with seawater, even though some of the estimated 138 remaining hostages might be in those tunnels.
Say it with me, folks. What could possibly go wrong? Bernie, you do realize that you once had a large political movement behind you, that you could have influenced and used your power, but you chose not to. You chose to be indifferent. Well done, Bernie. Big brain tactic.
Which once again raises the question, what exactly is Israel's endgame here? We are also hearing directly from one of the freed Israeli hostages, 73-year-old Irena Tati, who earlier today spoke with NBC's Richard Engel.
And the other question, what's it like for you to come back here after all that you've been through?
I feel better, but not very well. I want the war to stop. Oh. Sounds very reasonable. I think we all can agree. We want all these wars to stop. Wouldn't it be great? Peace in our time. I know that's a bridge too far for warmongers and people who want endless conflict, but what a sight it would be. Just maybe, I don't know, a year of no conflict. I don't know. Sounds like a good idea to me.
עכשיו אי אפשר לגור פה. עכשיו לא אי אפשר. מה שאחר כך אני יודעת.
And back here.
Yeah, it's going to be impossible. Because with so many people dying, so many civilians dead, 17,000 plus and rising, my question is, how many future Hamas supporters have you created? Hey, Bernie. You know, there was a moment when the politicians here in Washington, D.C. should have called for an immediate ceasefire because obviously having hospitals and refugee centers and civilian targets being bombed into oblivion was and should go in the big old box of no-nos, things not to do, but you chose not to. All what this conflict has done is prepare for the next conflict 10 years down the road.
In the U.S., pressure is growing on the White House to call for a ceasefire. Today, more than 500 staffers from over 140 Jewish organizations across the country signed on to an open letter to President Biden calling for a permanent ceasefire and the return of all hostages. Writing in part, many of us have devoted our life's work to building thriving Jewish communities. We know there is no military solution to this crisis. We know that Israelis and Palestinians are here to stay. Neither Jewish safety nor Palestinian liberation can be achieved if they are pitted against one another. Joining me now is Michelle Goldberg, columnist for the New York Times and an MSNBC political analyst. Michelle, it's always good to see you. I want to let you comment on that sweet elderly woman who is saying, "How do I live here now?" You know, the state of siege is so thorough and so overwhelming. The amount of death across that border, she lives in southern Israel, right near Gaza, has made her feel that she doesn't even know how things can go forward. She wants the war to end. Your comments.
Well, I would say two things. One of the reasons I think people are saying they can't live there now is that a lot of these kibbutzim have been, they've just lost a huge number of their population, and the entire area has been turned into a war zone. One of the things that is so devastating about the Hamas attacks and the war, I think, for many left of center Jews, is that it was really the heart of the peace movement that Hamas attacked. The kibbutzim in the south are the sort of heartland of what remains of socialist labor Zionism.
Yeah.
People who are very much opposed to the current government. So
Wow. Again, it's very interesting she brings that up because, as others have pointed out, Netanyahu had a lot of domestic issues before October 7th. Now, Bernie Sanders, being the jagoff politician, because we have to return it back to Bernie Sanders, he could and should have maintained his political organization. He should have used his power to influence the Democratic Party. I mean, if he actually was someone who believed in fighting for a better future, he would have been consistent. But he took us all for a ride. I want to pull up this video. Shout out again to Nick from Revolutionary Blackout Network. Here's Bernie Sanders' overall legacy.
Warmongering Democrat that cosplays as an independent, Bernie Sanders, is very sad that United States support for the war in Ukraine is coming to an end. This bill would have given Ukraine $50 billion more in security assistance. The Republican Party blocked it, and now Bernie Sanders is complaining that they won't allow him and his party to wage endless war against Russia. Bernie claims that if we allow Ukraine to fall, that Putin will then expand his authoritarian aggression to quote-unquote democratic states.
So you hear that? Bernie's all shocked about what's happening in Israel and its fight against Gaza. But whoa. He's all on board with Ukraine versus Russia. Oh no, if Russia takes over Ukraine, that's it. Here comes a war against a NATO country. More fear-mongering. I expected a little bit more out of Bernie, I expected him to be a little bit more rational. Not to be intertwined with the Democratic establishment. However, looking back at 2016 and even at 2020 and how those two primaries played out, Bernie was playing nice as a Democratic Party. I think a lot of us were just hypnotized with all the words that he was saying and how different he was in comparison to Hillary or even Trump. But the thing is, as Due Dissidence has pointed out, and even later on, as Jimmy Dore had proven out too, even before Due Dissidence, Jimmy Dore, I stuttered on that one. Bernie was never consistent. He wasn't who he said he was, which is why we are where we are now and why so many people are disappointed in the once great progressive heavyweight champion, Bernie Sanders.
Bernie is essentially taking the same position as Dick Cheney, Mike Pompeo, Anthony Blinken, and the worst neocons. What a pathetic fall from grace from Bernie Sanders, who even the professional managerial class left is starting to turn on. Better late than never, I suppose. It took Bernie Sanders refusing to call for a ceasefire in the middle of a genocide, AOKing Israel's killing of thousands of children for people to finally turn on this scumbag. Bernie Sanders has been a fraud for quite some time. He pulled the biggest political heist of the working class in my lifetime. $300 to $400 million wasted in the last two elections by the working class, propping up this pro-war fraud. Imagine the people we could have fed, the mutual aid organizations we could have built with the money that we wasted on Bernie Sanders.
Let that serve as a lesson. It was a waste, but an important lesson. I encourage all of you to consider this. I get it that a lot of us can be entrapped in following a person or believing that said leader will take us to the promised land. We've seen that happen time and time again throughout human history, where people follow somebody thinking that they will liberate or change the system, all in all. And if they are successful, things slightly change, but nothing progressively huge happens, or either that it was all one big waste. Bernie Sanders, like many politicians, has a very sketchy background. And I think when we push forward, especially going into 2024, I know a lot of you in my viewing audience, you have openly said that you're burnt out by electoral politics, or maybe you're going to sit this one out, or maybe this will be your last election. I know I've said it on the show because I don't know if truly at this point in time, it doesn't matter who sits on the throne anymore in the White House, because Goldman Sachs is going to have the final say. But what does matter is that we collectively look at what we were able to do. Maybe if it was focused on mutual aid organizations, helping each other out, and maybe breaking down the borders, the mental, the social borders that divide us as a country, maybe we would be in a better spot. Because Americans right now, a lot of us are enraged, we're divided, we're all upset and concerned about how this entire election will play out. The number one issue is the economy, and nobody in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party has our best interests. Don't hero worship these politicians. They don't like you. They don't think about you. They don't respect you. You think if Bernie Sanders believed in his movement, he would quickly jump up and support his good friend Joe Biden way early on? Joe Biden, who's low in the polls, Joe Biden, who's losing to Trump in not one, but 6 swing states, and it's rising up. Joe Biden, who has a lot of scandals flying around him, yet Bernie Sanders endorsed him. So that means Bernie Sanders, I hate to say this, and this is just my opinion, he didn't like us, he didn't think about us, and he doesn't respect us. Same thing like with AOC. She was quick to jump on board to endorse Joe Biden. The Democrats did this to themselves, and it was a waste, but it's a lesson. We all make mistakes, people. All of us. We're not perfect. But if we're going to fight for a better future, we have to learn from the past, and that is Bernie Sanders. Like your words, just wish you had follow through, which you don't.